Alright, it's been a few months since the first TV Obscura. Let's roll up a new random date and see if we can find some forgotten and obscure TV shows. Got it. January 15th, 1965, a Friday. I Feel Fine by the Beatles was topping the Billboard charts. James Bond was #1 in the box office with Goldfinger. And 5 days later, Lyndon B. Johnson would be sworn in for his first full term as president. Cool. So let's go to newspapers.com, put in the date, and look at the first newspaper that comes up. So a lot of people use these archives to track births, marriages, and deaths, genealogy stuff. It's a sister site for Ancestry.com. So the first thing that comes up in any date search are obituaries. It's a great page to start on. Now I get to see who died tragically young 60 years ago. Alright, so the first newspaper on the list is the Lincoln Star for Lincoln, Nebraska. Let's roll over to the front page and... Armless driver, harmless, but computer disagrees. That is a hell of a front page story. I didn't even know computers were being used for DMV functions at that time. So I wanted to know more, so I did some research, and it turns out that this guy, Ray R. Myers, is pretty cool. Born without arms, he learned to play the guitar with his feet, which got him some show business attention, and in the 1950s, he had his own daily radio show in Clarksburg, West Virginia. Which means he had to be, really good on the guitar, right? Because the whole armless musician thing doesn't really translate to radio. I hope he got his driver's license back. Gotta stop by the comic strips while I'm here. Love exploring which strips are forgotten and which became institutions. Beetle Bailey hasn't changed a bit over the last 60 years. No Peanuts in this paper, that's surprising. Figured it'd be an institution by this point. A Charlie Brown Christmas special would have been in production around this time. Oh, the Donald Duck comic strip, written by Bob Karp and illustrated by Al Taliaferro. But of course, it's solely credited to Walt Disney. Alright, let's get to those TV listings. It's the 1960s, so naturally there's only 5 channels to choose from. NBC, ABC, 2 different CBS stations, and KUON, aka ETV, aka Nebraska Educational Television, broadcast out of the University of Nebraska. Sort of the local NET station, NET being the precursor to PBS. Lots of television documentaries and culture shows, but as you see from the listings here, the titles are truncated or vague, so identifying a lot of these shows is gonna be a challenge. Let's see, we got some classics, Captain Kangaroo, The Flintstones, The Addams Family, Johnny Carson, plenty of westerns, The Rifleman, Rawhide. I like how clean things are split between morning, afternoon, and evening, so I'm gonna try and find a show from each. But here's the question. What qualifies as obscure in this case? I think I had a good idea in the first episode because I was actually around in 1999. I think I have a good sense of what people were actually watching and what fell by the wayside. I was very much not around in 1965, and while there are obviously shows that are not failures, that are not obscure, like I couldn't possibly make the argument against Leave It to Beaver, there are shows that have faded with time, but only because it's been 60 years and everything fades with time. There are shows here that I haven't heard of, but were cornerstone programs for the young baby boomers back in the day. For example, I guess you could call this an honorary mention, there's The Funny Company, a collection of educational animated shorts in which kids, dinosaurs, and Native American stereotypes hang out at a clubhouse, discuss a topic, and then a computer presents a little live-action documentary on the subject.
Yeah, a Mirage. That's where you park your camel.
All right, you jokers, this is getting out of hand. Let's start with the facts. Let's start with the country of Arabia, land of King Solomon's mines.
Now, if you're my age or younger, there's a very good chance you've never heard of The Funny Company. I don't think it had much lasting staying power in popular culture, the way something like Schoolhouse Rock did. However, it did run in syndication for a very long time. It had a whopping 260 episodes, and based on the discussions I found online, it remains a popular, nostalgic cartoon for older baby boomers. Just for older baby boomers, but I don't think they would call it obscure television. So this is really a tough thing to judge. To cover my bases, I've selected 3 shows from this 1965 listing that you might call obscure for 3 different reasons. The first show just flopped. Nobody watched it when it was on. The second show was watched by many and aired for more than a decade, but was so niche and for a very specific audience that if you weren't part of its target demographic, you probably just ignored it. And finally, a show that was well made and well regarded in its time, but has had no support after its final episode. No reruns, no home video, no streaming, no way for newer audiences to discover it. So, without further ado, let's get into it.
Martha, I'm not strong like Tom was. I wasn't meant to be a martyr. How long can I go on alone?
Watch Flame in the Wind each weekday on ABC.
For our morning show, we jump into the world of soap operas, those cheap, quickly produced daily dramas meant to keep the housewives occupied and advertised to while kids were at school and the husband was at work. A Flame in the Wind aired on ABC for 2 years, between December 1964 and December of 1966, producing 515 episodes, which, compared to most TV shows, might sound like a lot, but the 10,000 or more episode monoliths of most popular soap operas make it look absolutely shrimpy in comparison. The show centers around the community of Haviland, where half a dozen families fall in love, form love triangles, cheat on each other, get pregnant with another man's baby, etc., etc., etc. The initial plot revolves around an author, played by Kathleen Maguire, writing a novel clearly based on the goings-on in the town, just with names changed, a roman éclair, if you will. And the rest of Haviland, not wanting to see their dirty laundry aired out like that, work to stop its publication. By all accounts, A Flame in the Wind was kind of a relationship-based drama that required a pinboard to keep track of all the characters. Who was in love with who was backstabbing who. The plot summaries I've managed to find made my eyes glaze over with all the names. And like most soap operas, if you haven't been following from day one, you're gonna be jumping into the deep end of the story. The one episode available online involves a young man revealing to his father that he got a girl he doesn't love pregnant, while another young man tells the same pregnant girl that they're gonna get married whether she loves him or not. And that's it. That's the entire episode. That doesn't sound like much of a plot, but don't worry, they drag it out with long conversations, repeating themselves with the stilted delivery of an actor probably reading off a cue card because soap opera production is so fast you don't have time to learn your lines.
Dad, remember that time that I climbed that big chestnut tree near the front gate?
Oh, I'll never forget it. You were only 8. I don't know to this day how you ever got to the top.
Neither do I. But when I got there, I looked and saw how far down it was to the ground. And I hung on for dear life and started yelling. And you had to come and bring me down.
You were pretty scared.
Well, that was mild compared to this. Dad, I never dreamed anything like this could happen. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. I'm scared because I don't know what to do.
A Flame in the Wind was co-created by Joseph Hardy, producer of the much more successful soap opera Love of Life, and Raphael Hayes, best known for his screenplay for the interracial romance film One Potato, Two Potato. Hardy's goals with the series was to get right into it, not waste time developing characters, just full speed out of the starting gate. With most new serials, it takes months to build up audience awareness. The story usually doesn't begin unfolding until long after each of the characters have been introduced. I deliberately shortened this traditional build-up period with new serials by concentrating on themes that move quickly from event to event. Now, I'm not a soap opera expert by a long shot, but I figured the slow pacing was kind of the biggest advantage of the format. The stories do move slowly, if at all, but there's a new episode every weekday, so you never feel disengaged. You can take as much time as you want. Well, this pacing must have backfired because A Flame in the Wind became the lowest rated soap opera through its entire 2-year run. Its initial 2 p.m. time slot had put it up against the very popular game show Password and reruns of the Loretta Young Show, and it just never found its footing. In June of 1965, only 6 months into the soap's run, the series was given a soft reboot in hopes of attracting a larger audience. It was retitled to the much more generic A Time for Us. Many of the roles were recast, and the focus shifted away from the adventures of a gossipy, middle-aged widowed author and more on the young adult adventures. That clip from earlier, that was from the A Time for Us version of the show. One interesting addition to the cast was Anne Revere, an Academy Award-winning actress who was blacklisted in 1951 for refusing to testify to the House of Un-American Activities Committee. She wouldn't appear in another movie until 1970, and in the meantime pivoted into a career in television, primarily soap operas such as this.
I know how much you love her and how much you want her to be a part of everything you do, but you have known from the beginning it might not work out that way.
Yeah, but I've been trying not to think about it.
But you can't afford not to think about it. Jane is a fine girl, but she may not be the girl. If she isn't Dave, it isn't the end of the world. And the time to find that out is now rather than later.
This reboot didn't work. The ratings stayed low, and A Time for Us ended on December 16th, 1966. With only one episode available to me, I can't speak to the show's broader qualities. I can't tell you if the Flame in the Wind version was better or not, but I will say that the whole author spilling the tea idea was at least a hook. Nothing makes the A Time for Us version stand out in the sea of soaps, and the one episode I have is just dull. Of course, there being only one episode is its own issue. With 5 whole episodes released every week, non-stop, sometimes for decades, soap opera preservation and availability is a whale of a task. For example, 1965 was also the year Days of Our Lives premiered, which is still going on today, and has aired over 14,400 episodes, most of them an hour long. It would be impossible to binge watch this show in any reasonable fashion, and Days of Our Lives is believed to be one of only 2 soap operas with complete archives, the other being The Young and the Restless. Even General Hospital is missing a few episodes. And while there are dedicated soap opera communities out there, the genre's reputation for being trashy, low-budget television has made these shows less of a priority among media preservationists. A soap opera that flopped? Who's going to go looking for that? The fact that we even have one episode of A Time for Us is kind of a miracle, something I'll be expressing a lot in this video. The series was probably broadcast live and never put on tape. The soft borders of this footage suggest that it's a kinescope recording, which is when you basically point a film camera at a television screen and record the broadcast. Soap operas are treated like low art, pulp art, but they are art, and art is always worth contemplating. I haven't a clue if Flame in the Wind was good. I suspect it wasn't, but I kind of wish I could watch enough of it to come to that conclusion.
Bonjour tout le monde. Comment allez-vous? Moi, très bien, merci.
Since television began, we've been trying to figure out how to make educational television work, especially educational television for children. How much time should be given to such a thing? What should it look like? What should it teach? Well, in 1954, WRGB, the CBS affiliate for Schenectady, New York, decided to give televised French lessons for school children a try. Fun with French was the first French language teaching show on American television. A weekly series shown in schools decades before cable in the classroom, Fun with French was hosted by educator Anne Slack, who, along with a small group of children, would work through basic French vocabulary words, songs, and conversations. This was interspersed with footage and photographs of France, and reportedly scenes involving puppet characters, though I couldn't find any images of that. Alas, with it being a live local program from the 1950s, no footage of Fun with French survives. But it was successful, still going strong 5 years later in 1959. Meanwhile, Boston educators were looking into a possible full televised curriculum that they called 21-inch Classroom, with intent to broadcast shows on mathematics and social sciences to 40 different school districts. As the 1950s were coming to a close, the Modern Language Project, a division of the Massachusetts Council for Public Schools, approached 21 Classroom about introducing a French language program to the lineup. But instead of making a new show from scratch, 21-inch Classroom went, hey, why don't we just buy out Fun with French and bring it over here? Much of Fun with French's production, including Anne Slack, were brought over to Boston, and Fun with French was rebooted as Parlons Français, speaking French. While the basic lessons were the same, with songs and vocabulary, the show no longer included children in front of the camera. Instead, Parlons Français featured little scenes between actors, set in a small French village.
Bonjour madame.
Bonjour monsieur l'agent, qu'est-ce que vous voulez?
Je voudrais 1 kilo de pommes.
Voilà monsieur, 1 kilo de pommes.
Alas, the one episode of Parlons Français I managed to track down is not one hosted by Anne Slack. It comes from the show's third and final season, produced in 1962, after Slack had stepped away from television to become a teacher at Boston University, which sadly means we don't get to see the woman who originated all of this doing her work. Instead, the host is Nancy Willard, who has a very calm presence.
Quand trois poules vont au champ, la première va devant vous. Quand trois poules vont au champ, la première va devant. Bon.
This third season also featured the show's first original all-French story, The Green Turtle. 2 children have lost their poodle, and while looking for it, meet up with a magical green turtle who points them towards an undersea kingdom called the Land of Lost Dogs, ruled by King Findall and guarded by a vicious octopus. The kids find magic flowers that let them breathe underwater, but those same flowers happen to be the octopus's favorite snack, so it attacks them. Then the green turtle shows up and magically burns the octopus into submission. What wild, dreamlike nonsense, and all in French too. Parlons Français was produced by WGBH, Boston's NET affiliate, and would end up being syndicated through NET across the United States, which would land it on ETV in Lincoln, Nebraska in January of 1965. Reruns would air on various channels across the United States up through 1973, around which time black and white television was going out of style, and PBS, the Children's Television Workshop, and Sesame Street completely revamped what children's educational television would look like going forward. If you include Fun with French, that's a 19-year run. Even if most of those years were reruns, that's pretty impressive, and the program definitely left an impact. When Anne Slack passed away in 2010 at the age of 94, educators inspired by her television work paid tribute. I am a French teacher because of Anne Slack. I fell in love. She was like a rock star to me. I decided in the 3rd grade I was going to grow up and be a French teacher. So with that kind of influence, can we really call Parlons Français an obscure show? I think we can, for the same reason we can call an old 1960s school textbook an obscure book. It may have been experienced by millions of impressionable young people, but its impact was the lessons it taught more than how it served as a piece of television. And much like many American school textbooks, Parlons Français was directed by a certain sense of American nationalism, by which I mean the United States government funded French lessons on TV because of Sputnik.
Studying this scene, you may ask, just how important is it that these young people become teachers, scientists, administrators? Here's one answer. Sputnik is a product of higher education, of instructors who teach much of the physics and mathematics in high school that we teach in college. How important? Our survival may depend on degrees and graduates we are not now equipped to produce. The decade ahead is one of critical decision. Expand, improve, support, urges the committee. Expand everywhere and now.
In 1958, the National Defense Education Act was signed by President Dwight D. Eisenhower, a science education initiative in correspondence with the founding of NASA, in response to the Soviet Union kicking off the space race. One of the main goals was to improve science education in grade school. And of course, by science, we mean making better missiles. It was called the Defense Education Act. Title VII of the Act involved developing existing technologies, namely radio, television, and film, into educational tools. Did you ever see that Donald Duck cartoon about math? That was funded by the National Defense Education Act. 21-inch took full advantage of this, having all of their shows, including Parlons Français, partially government funded. And when the government funding ended 4 years later, that's when all these shows went into reruns. Of course, French isn't a science curriculum, but language education also had a place in post-war America. Prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States was very non-interventionalist, trying to maintain a neutral relationship with other countries so as to not get dragged into other people's wars. That changed after World War II. With the founding of NATO and the United Nations, the United States was very much a global force, and with that came a need for more multilingual personnel to represent American interests. The USA today carries new responsibilities in many quarters of the globe. We are at a serious disadvantage because of the difficulty of finding persons who can deal with the foreign language problem. Interpreters are no substitute. This isn't to say that learning a new language is a bad thing or a nationalist thing. I fully support language classes and education, but the government and corporations have a way of shaping what education looks like. Parlons Français is a charming little show that inspired baby boomer kids to learn French, and it was a tool to prepare American citizens for the global platform the country now found itself in. Le monde est une contradiction. I probably got that wrong.
Democracy is a very bad form of government, but I ask you never to forget. All the others are so much worse.
And speaking of the intersection between television and government, here's a television show about the government. Richard Crenna plays James Slattery, a level-headed state legislator maneuvering between the needs of his constituents and the push and pull of politics. The show follows an issue-of-the-day format. Slattery first comes across an issue among the general public. For example, in one episode, a vacationing doctor fails to save a man's life in an emergency situation, and the threat of being sued hangs over him.
Well, let me clue you in on the processes of grief, Mr. Slattery. At the moment, Mrs. Fancher is stunned. Her first thought is what she'll say to her kids, how she'll survive it. But in the next few days, on the advice of a relative or an emotionally uninvolved neighbor, she's going to contact a lawyer. What, malpractice? Following a doctor's injunction almost as old as a Hippocratic oath, protect thy right flank. In case you don't know it, in this state, a good Samaritan is open game.
Slattery then gets inspired by the issue and starts working within government to improve it, introducing bills or representing individuals to committees to see the issue addressed, where he's always met with stern opposition for what seems like a reasonable position. In this episode, he introduces a Good Samaritan bill to stop people from getting lawsuit happy with doctors who are just trying their best.
The Good Samaritan Act, exempting doctors from any liability when they stop to administer emergency treatment to their injured fellow man. You have a very popular bill there, Slattery. It exudes sweetness and light. You want my help, I take it.
I recognize the political facts of life, Adam. Nothing gets through health and welfare without your approval.
That's true. Nothing does.
However, as Slattery is putting in the honest work, he learns of a complication that muddies the water. In this case, the doctor being sued has acted negligently, failing to assess the victim's allergies before administering strong medications, and attempting to hide the evidence afterwards. Whether he succeeds or fails in his mission, Slattery always seems to walk away with a stronger understanding of the complexities of life and politics, while still holding on to his moral core. Actually, going off of the 4-ish episodes of the show available to me, Slattery tends to lose more often than he wins. The very first scene of the very first episode is Slattery failing to pass amendments to a new bill. Slattery doesn't quite have Jimmy Stewart in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington levels of naivete, but he is an idealist that doesn't always grasp the complexities of a given issue until he's up to his chin in it. He's a sort of political everyman, a good citizen trying his best with a straight back and a straight tie. The show goes out of its way to be as non-partisan as possible. We never learn which state Slattery represents, or which party he belongs to, besides the fact that he's the head of the current minority party, whichever one that might be. Things are kept vague in hopes of being applicable to as large an audience as possible. But what the show lacks in partisan politics, it more than makes up for in contemporary politics. Some of the stories seem timeless. You could probably remake the one about the negligent doctor and the Good Samaritan bill today with very few changes. But then you get an episode about a newspaper attacking the head of a school board, echoing old McCarthyism rhetoric.
And this slob Murdoch gets up and turns his answer into a speech. Well, I couldn't take it anymore, so I slugged him.
Well, what was this Murdoch speech all about? Well, answer me.
Subversives. Subversives in government. Quote, superannuated left-wing party pink eggheads. With a special nod to the Board of Education. He quoted from those newspaper stories about you.
And even more 1965 than that is an entire episode about the orphans of the Korean War, about the government's responsibility to find them good American homes to be raised up as good American citizens.
I guarantee you'll never forget their faces. They're Americans now.
What's your name?
What are you, Ethan?
I'm not American, I'm a cowboy.
You're a cowboy. You're also a troll king sent here to plague me. That's what you are. All right, now all of you going off to your mission. Go!
It's hard to know all the topics covered in Slattery's People, as many of the episode titles are just gibberish, where each title is presented as a vague metaphorical question, like, question, how long is the shadow of a man? Or, question, does Nero still at ringside sit? Or, question, did he who made the lamb make thee? They dropped this crap in Season 2, where we get titles like The Unborn or Color Him Red. Not too hard to guess what those episodes might be about. Premiering on September 21st, 1964, Slattery's People was created by James Moser, who made a career around shows about stoic professional men standing tall as they serve the people. He wrote a bunch of episodes for Dragnet, and created a handful of medical dramas like Medic, Doctor's Hospital, and Ben Casey, arguably his most successful show. He came up with Slattery after spending time with an old friend who happened to be a lobbyist in Sacramento, California, Moser finding his stories of dealing with the state legislator fascinating. I went to Sacramento and spent 8 months digging. The toughest part was to get into the inner circle, to get them to trust me. The political life of a state capital almost entirely exists within a 6 square block area. You have to be part of that area to deal with this subject. What sucked for Moser was that Slattery's People, which aired on CBS, was put up against Ben Casey's 4th season over on ABC. As Moser put it, it's like watching a couple of your kids fight it out with switchblade knives. By all accounts, Slattery's People did okay. Mediocre ratings and lukewarm reviews from the critics. Real politicians seemed quite happy with the show's neutral tone. I am pleased that they have taken the high road to show a legislator's life, and have not pandered to sensationalism or unreality to stimulate an audience following. All of which is to say, damn, this show is really dry and boring. In its attempt to be as non-specific and non-alienating as possible, Slattery's People stops itself from having a cohesive point of view, beyond an appeal to a can't we all just get along style of centrist politics. Each episode is about 60% men in suits standing around and talking sternly to each other, 35% Senate hearings, and 5% everything else. Occasionally something dramatic will happen, but always because a citizen outside of the system is acting irrationally. Like a man who is denied the adoption of a Korean orphan on grounds of his mental health, decides to hold the kid hostage, but it all gets resolved without blood by Slattery being a rational, decent fellow.
You've got it made, haven't you? Sure. You've got position. You have money, Mr. Slattery. They know you exist. They listen to you.
The people that matter, Jim, won't listen with respect to anybody who tries to force their attention. You're not going to solve anything this way, you know. If you really want Judy, you can take your case to court.
The show is all dialogue, but lacks the witticisms we would later see in programs like The West Wing, which also aimed for a centrist appeal, but at least let characters be Democrats or Republicans and let them be interesting on their own merits. Slattery is a plank of wood, or at least that's my impression of him from the episodes available to me. Richard Crenna was better known for his sitcom work at the time, having just come off The Real McCoys, and he actually wasn't looking to do dramatic work.
And they brought me this script, and I said, no, you don't understand. I do not want to do a drama. I want to do a comedy. And they said, well, just read the script and see what you think. Well, I read the script and fell in love with the character and the script. And I called my agents. I said, I think we should forget the idea of the comedy, half hour. I think this is what I really want to do.
And I don't want to say his performance is bad. His performance is almost certainly what was asked of him from the scripts and direction. But Slattery is among the most empty, unengaging protagonists I've seen on a television show. There's the occasional tease of a romantic subplot, but the character can't commit to anything long-term, so that just all fizzles out before the credits roll. However, some might disagree, as Crenna was nominated for 2 Emmys and a Golden Globe for his performance, so what do I know? The nominations were not enough to keep the series going, however. Slattery's People ran for 2 seasons for a total of 36 episodes, which is okay as far as these things go. It wasn't a one-season wonder. It aired its last on November 16, 1965. And I do mean its last, because as soon as it was over, Slattery's People vanished into another dimension and was never heard from again. Seriously, I might be missing something here, but I looked through TV listings for hours, and I don't think Slattery's People has ever had a single rerun in the 60 years since it first aired. 36 episodes isn't the most conducive to syndication, but it's not unheard of. It just never happened for Slattery. No reruns on the network, none on the local UHF stations, nothing on Nick at Night, nothing on TV Land, nothing on MeTV, no VHS releases, no DVD releases. It's not currently available on streaming, and I don't believe it ever has been. The fact that there are 3 episodes up on YouTube is kind of a miracle. I don't know what witchcraft this Joey guy cast to get this footage, but I'm very grateful for it. The only other piece of Slattery media available is the script for the show's first episode, which was printed in full in a book on television writing published in 1966. Slattery's People has a profile on the Television Obscurities website that goes into much more of the nitty-gritty details of the show's development and performance. I highly recommend checking it out. There's a link in the description below. And there we have it. 3 shows from 1965 that fit the definition of obscure in their own unique ways. Would A Flame in the Wind be remembered if it had found its audience and ran for even a little bit longer? Would Parlons Français be remembered if it had stayed the educational standard and Muzzy hadn't taken its spot in the culture for us millennials? Would Slattery's People be remembered if it reran even a little bit and allowed itself to find a small cult following? The truth is, that's just delaying the inevitable. As history moves on, things fall to the wayside, especially art. A work of art being popular may give it a longer lifespan, stay well known for years or centuries, or even a millennia or 2. But eventually we will forget the Mona Lisa, Beethoven's Fifth, and Star Wars. Works successful in their time, maintaining a modern relevancy, and being found worthy of preservation. The vast, vast, vast majority of art isn't even that lucky.